Hello, it is so wonderful to have you here. Tonight we will continue the story of Noah Merrick in the Lighthouse Diaries series. If you haven't heard the first episodes, please go to our channel to take it from the start. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the newest episodes once they are released. And now let's get into the story. Chapter 3: The Driftwood Map. The fog came in before dawn, heavy as unspoken thought. When I stepped outside, the world had been erased down to 20 yards of colourless air. The beam from the lantern climbed out of it like thread pulled through cloth. Here, then gone, then here again. I told myself fog is only weather, but Greyhaven has a talent for making weather feel like intention. Inside, the kettle took its time to boil. The kitchen smelled faintly of damp rope. I sat with a journal open to last night's entry. The words, "The light feels brighter when I'm not in the room," staring back at me. I couldn't remember writing that line. The handwriting was mine, but the pressure of the pen looked wrong, too deep, as if written by a hand that leaned harder on certainty. I checked the desk. The bottles were as I'd left them, corks glistening with salt. Only the driftwood was still gone. I searched without conviction. Under the bed, behind the stove, even inside the narrow cupboard that smells like kerosene and old raincoats. Nothing. When I looked up, the journal had closed itself. I told myself it was the breeze from the open window. I spent the morning pretending normalcy, trimming the wick, checking the oil, cleaning the lens until my reflection came back to me in dull fragments. Routine is the backbone of sanity in lonely places. At midday, the fog lifted just enough to show the line of the south cliffs. From up here, they looked like folded paper, delicate and easily torn. Something glinted at their base, a flash, brief as a wink. I thought of the letters, of the promise that someone would come when the moon was small. The moon last night had been a fingernail. I noted the bearings in my logbook out of habit, though I had no reason to. The act of writing coordinates made the world behave. Around 3 o'clock, a faint tapping began again. Not the polite kind from the window, but a different rhythm, slower, deliberate. It came from below the floorboards near the stairwell, as though someone were walking in the room beneath me, a room that doesn't exist. I followed the sound down the spiral stairs, counting steps to keep the pulse steady. It stopped as soon as I reached the base. There's a hatch set into the floor there, small, rusted shut, which I assumed led to nothing more than drainage. For the time, I wondered if the assumption belonged to me or to whoever last said it aloud. I knelt, pressed an ear to the metal. The iron was cold enough to bite. From somewhere beneath came the muted throb of water moving in confined space. When I drew back, a patch of condensation ballooned where my breath had struck the hatch. In the center of the moisture was a faint spiral, 5 curved lines crossing like the grain of wood, exactly like the map that had vanished. Mara arrived later with mail and a bottle of paraffin. She took one look at me and said, "You've seen something." "Fog does tricks," I said. "So do lighthouses." She set the paraffin down. "When you start hearing things, that's when it's working." I told her about the hatch. She went quiet in the way people do when they're organizing what not to say. "Some of the old towers have underchambers," she said finally, "used for drainage or storage. Some say the builders left charms down there, copper coins, sailors' teeth, bits of rope, offerings." "Charms against what?" "Against remembering," she said almost kindly. "Places like this collect memory the way rocks collect lichen." She refused tea, left before sunset. When the engine of her boat faded, the silence grew tall enough to lean against. At night, the fog returned, and with it, a low hum. Not mechanical, not wind. It was close to the pitch of a human voice caught in thought. The lantern above turned as it always does, but every third rotation, the beam faltered, dimmed, then recovered. I checked the switch, the generator, the oil, everything in order. When I closed my eyes, I could feel the pulse of the light through the floor, matching my heartbeat, or teaching it a new rhythm. I wrote to keep my hands occupied. Fog returned, heard resonance through structure, possible generator feedback. The words looked official enough to disguise fear. At some point, I must have slept at the desk, because I woke to the smell of brine and the faint creak of wood expanding. On the blotter lay a wet outline, the exact shape of the Driftwood map. Within the dampness, tiny grains of sand formed the same spiral pattern I'd seen on the hatch. When I wiped it away, the ink beneath had blurred into a single word I hadn't written. Below. Morning brought a wind from the east, sharp, insistent. I took a wrench and pried at the bolts of the hatch until one surrendered with a sound like a sigh through teeth. The smell that came out was old sea, iron, mildew, salt, and something faintly sweet like dried kelp. A narrow ladder descended into dark. I fetched the lantern and climbed down 3 rungs, enough to see the chamber. A circle of stone no taller than a man. Water glimmered across the floor in a thin sheet, pulsing with the rhythm of the tide. On the far wall, lines had been scratched into the mortar. Arcs, crosses, spirals. Some fresh, some nearly dissolved. One spiral matched the mark from my journal. The water rose a fraction, touched the sole of my boot, retreated. It felt deliberate. I climbed back up and closed the hatch, not because I was afraid of flooding, but because it felt impolite to stare. That evening, the missing driftwood lay on my bed. No footprints, no sign of intrusion, just the wood, dry, clean, waiting. The carved lines glowed faintly, as if damp from within. When I turned it over, new marks had appeared on the back. Rows of shallow cuts forming letters so rough I had to angle them toward the lamplight to read. Elias, the throat breathes. Listen. The air in the room thickened, as if the building itself inhaled. I went to the window. The tide was low. The rocks gleamed like wet teeth. I could hear it now, the breathing Mara had named. Long in, long out. The sea, drawing through hidden tunnels beneath the cliffs. But inside the rhythm was something extra. A counterbeat, like speech trying to happen. I turned off the lamp. Darkness pressed close, companionable and absolute. In that hush, breathing changed. It shaped a word I could almost recognize, a syllable I felt rather than heard. Noah. My name, spoken the way water says it, without consonants, softened by distance. I stood a long time before lighting the lamp again. The light stuttered once like a blink. The next morning, the bottles were reversed. The older green one now held a letter, the clear one empty. I hadn't touched either since yesterday. I eased the cork free with shaking hands. Noah, you answered. I didn't know the light could change hands. I thought time had stopped above the water. Keep listening. The tide will tell you when to open the way. M. The paper was dry, too dry, as though written somewhere that never knew salt. I read it twice, then looked towards the hatch. The metal was sweating. Third day of fog. Heard voice, uncertain origin. Found message addressed to me. Water level under floor fluctuating beyond normal tide range. Driftwood returned with inscription. I keep telling myself that solitude rearranges the mind, that voices form where silence grows too dense. But I'm starting to think Greyhaven isn't echoing me. It's answering. I stopped writing when the tapping started again, this time from above. 3 short taps, then 2, then silence, like someone learning Morse code by instinct. I looked up. Dust sifted from the ceiling in a slow fall. The light overhead pulsed once, and the room held its breath with me. Somewhere deep in the walls, the sea exhaled. To be continued. Join me next week here at the Midnight Vale. to hear the next episode of Noah Merrick's story. Good night and welcome to the Vale.